You might not feel like your mind gets blown away today, but I do promise you if you come back the next couple weeks, it probably will. Hopefully it's a good blown away, okay? That's what we hope. And if you receive it properly, it should be. I don't think most of us like sudden change, where things were going along in a certain direction, and then all of a sudden, drastically, our life changes. And it happens that throughout our lifetime, there are a few of those things that happen to bring that about. One of those is a sudden death. If you've ever been a part of someone in your family that just had a heart attack or just an accident and there was a sudden death, in a moment, in a second, your life can change forever. And most of us don't care for that. We live in a time period whenever, even on speaking financially, that we have people whose lives changed in a moment. They went and bought a lottery ticket, and they found out that they had won mega millions of dollars. Now, let me just go ahead and clarify something with you. The chances of you dying on the way home from church today are a lot greater than you winning the lottery. So don't think I'm saying go out and do the lottery, okay? I'm not saying that. But it does happen. It does happen to some people to where they do. In an instant, they've gone, in some cases, from being just totally poor, living from kind of hand to mouth, to all of a sudden having mega millions. Now, we know that all the stories are out there, too, of those who that's turned all upside down on them, and it's, they end up hating people hating them, and all, this kind of all kinds of stuff. All the stories may not end that way, but part of the reason there's a high level of what we call failure with that situation is because many times people weren't prepared for the sudden change. And sudden change can happen in such a way that we're not really prepared for it. And so I don't know that we can be absolutely prepared for every sudden change that might occur in our lives, but I will tell you this, you can be better prepared or you can be totally unprepared. And so really today is kind of talking about how to be better prepared for the sudden changes that might come. And in particular, just to kind of give you a quick sense, we've kind of built a sub-series, and I'm going to explain it a little bit more toward the end of the message today, into this series that we're doing. And we're actually calling it money, which is kind of and the main reason we call it money because this is a real broad term. Today you might not even, Rod, what are you talking about? This doesn't sound like money talk to me. And it may not seem that way to you. But whenever you particularly come into a position of greater power or something happens in your life, whether it be you get an inheritance, whether it be that you get a raise in your job, whether it be that you have a situation where all of a sudden you've gotten a new promotion, those kinds of changes affect us very deeply. And if we're not prepared for them, oftentimes we don't live up to the potential of those changes. Now, I want to read, and today we're not going to be putting the verses on the PowerPoint because I'm going to be referring to them because we're going to be rolling through here, but I have the references on your sheet. And I want to start with, and this is not written down necessarily, so you can write it at the top of your sheet. Genesis, all of it's within Genesis, two or three chapters here of chapter 40 through 39, 39 through about 40 through 41. In that range is where the verses is taken from. But I want you to listen carefully to chapter 41, verses 14 and 15. And this is the sudden change that takes place in Joseph's life. And remember, we're talking about living strong and living strong without cheating. And we know Joseph is given all kinds of opportunities to cheat along the way. He chose not to, and it didn't mean that his story was all that awesome for a big piece of it. So here's when all of a sudden things change on him. Verses 14 and 15 says this. So Pharaoh, he'd had these dreams, sent for Joseph, and he was quickly brought from the dungeon. Quickly. That means they as quickly as they could, they come down there and go, Joseph, Pharaoh wants to see you. Now, let me finish reading this, and I'm going to kind of talk about this a minute. When he had shaved and changed his clothes, he came before Pharaoh. Pharaoh said to Joseph, I had a dream and no one can interpret it, but I have heard it said of you that when you hear a dream, you can interpret it. Now, I want you just to picture with me. We've kind of been following along this story with Joseph. Picture with me, he'd interpreted a couple dreams. 2 years have gone by since then. And so here's something that I do know about prison. Prison is very routine. And part of the reason it's routine, it's the way people keep their sanity. And because they have confined space, there's limited mobility. And so there's just certain things that they actually do every day at the same time. It's like it has to run that way. So here Joseph is. We don't know how long he was in before he interpreted his dreams, but obviously he'd been in for 2 years and probably a bit longer than that in this prison. And here he is going through another day. Now, here's something else about prison, in particular for Joseph's situation. Most prisons and jails have a visitation day. You can go and you can visit, and most prisoners, if they have a visitor, that's considered a great privilege. In fact, there can even be jealousy and envy and all kinds of stuff in the group whenever people have real regular visits. And so it's a privilege, it's a big deal. And prisoners will oftentimes, because when they send their uniforms off to the regular laundry area, it turns gray. Just like it's white uniforms in Georgia, they turn gray. And so if someone gets visited on a regular basis, they might hold a uniform out and hand wash it or exchange with somebody who works in the laundry for a few candy bars or something else to specifically wash theirs separate. And so there's all kinds of little deals like that because it's a big deal to get a visit. And here's the deal. Joseph was thrown into the dungeon and he wasn't getting any visits. Nobody was coming to see him. So, let's just say this. You take a day off. Or maybe you take the week off and you say, I'm gonna stay home this week. Not going any place. I've gotten plenty of groceries. I'm just gonna bum around the house. Normally when you do that, you don't primp in front of the mirror. You're just kind of like, and so if somebody comes to the door, you have a little panic. Oh, I've got this nightgown on that looks like from the dark ages, or I've got, all of a sudden, or I wasn't bothering with cleaning the house. I'm just taken off guard. Well, Joseph, even though he had requested to be remembered, even though he was, here he is, grunge look in the dungeon. And we know he was grungy because, when I say grungy, I'm not saying he was necessarily dirty. I'm just saying he was unkempt. His hair, he'd let his hair go. He had on, probably some threadbare uniform. And it's just another day. Whatever his routine was, he was in the middle of doing his routine. And someone bursts through the doors and says, Joseph, you look a mess, man. You got to get cleaned up. Pharaoh wants to see you. Now, in that moment, he didn't know. He knew that one of the guys he'd interpreted a dream for had his head cut off. The other one was restored. You don't know what all you're facing, what you're walking into. Pharaoh himself. You're saying the Pharaoh? Yeah. So they shaved him all up, neatened up his beard, or whatever, got him looking halfway decent, and they brought him in some street clothes, which probably consisted of another robe, which he may have had a little phobia of by this time, as mentioned before. So bottom line is, he gets all dressed up and he's taken before Pharaoh. Here he is, this chance of a lifetime, and here's this curve that Pharaoh throws at him. Hey, man, I understand that when you're told a dream, you can interpret it. And there's, this kind of dynamic, at least if I had been standing there in Joseph's shoes thinking, is it going to be this, like that? Or is it going to be, what are we in here for? Now, we won't read the rest of if you were to look down the next verse, you would see he basically just says, hey, I can't do it. And that's whenever I get myself kind of into the story, and I'm sitting there, and I just know when I read that, I'm thinking, Joseph, don't say that. Don't say you can't do it. But he didn't stop there. He says, but God will give Pharaoh the answer he desires. Now, here's the deal. Are you ready for whatever it is that God throws at you? Are you ready? Are you ready if God asks you to do something that's bigger than you? Are you ready if God challenges you beyond what you think you're capable of? Are you ready? I'm afraid that most of us live in such a here and now, and we live so much in the human, from a human perspective, that we shy away from anything that would take us out of our comfort zone, that would challenge us to do something greater than what we're already doing. And we've settled for a survival mentality that really ultimately comes down to a humanistic way of living, just saying, basically, I've got this figured out. I've mapped out what I can do, and that's what I'm going to do. I have a plan. I have it in place, and it looks like I'll survive this life. I mean, I know there's a lot of retirement issues up in the air and all that, but one of my kids looks like they're going to be successful, so I think I'm going to be okay. You know, however it is, you're scheming out, looking ahead and going, how's this going to work out? You know, and some of you may feel pretty settled in that, you know, until at least the world economy starts shaking. Others might feel like, man, I don't have a clue. I just hope I even live to retirement, you know? And so there's all kinds of scenarios there. But here's what I want to say as best I can. Everything in our lives has either prepared us for God's big ask in life, or it hasn't. We will either shrink away from what God calls us to, or we will find ourselves embracing it. And I just have to tell you, over the next few weeks, and I'm going to come back to the story, and then I'm going to come back to what I'm going to say here toward the end. What we're going to talk about the next few weeks is going to challenge you. It actually is going to, it has the potential to make some of you mad. I'm just going to go ahead and tell you straight up front. It has that potential. Not because we're doing something wrong, but because we're saying we believe God is asking us to do something greater than we're doing today. And in doing that, we can't do that alone. It's not a solo idea. It's not a solo prospect. It is something we have to do together. And then I think within the spirits of many of you, and I hope everybody, there will be something that will leap forward and embrace and accept what it is that we believe God's calling us to. And in order for you to fully understand that, know that, you will have to be back for the next few Sundays, okay? Because it's going to get rolled out in that way. And so let me encourage you to do so. Now, let's jump to our outline and let's go back to the story of Joseph. And here's what I want us to look at three things. I want us to look at his road to success, the reasons for success, and the responsibilities of success once it occurs. And so let's look at his road first of all. I don't know, have any of you ever heard this country, sometimes they play it on Christian radio, sometimes the song, something along the lines of God Bless the Broken Road? Anybody ever heard that song? Wow, okay. I guess I should have played it for you. I thought if everybody raised their hands, I was going to go, you sinners, you know, or something like that. Because it's like, I think it's, anyway, they're good guys that sing it. I forget the country group that sings it. But God Bless the Broken Road. It's really kind of a love song. It's really about how wherever you finally meandered through life and finally you found the person you were looking for. But it gets used in a metaphoric sense also sometimes on Christian radio for finding God. Our broken road brings us to God as well. And so I think Joseph's story was what they based that song on, you know, in a sense, especially as it relates to coming to some sense of success in his life. And so his road to success looked like this. Favor. He was born a privileged kid. He was born the favorite son of his father. He was born to his father's favored wife. It was just, had favor everywhere around. He had this coat of privilege, this coat of many colors. He had it going on as far as privilege goes. He was the favorite son, and everybody knew it. Joseph was born into favor, and he experienced favor all through his growing up years, maybe at least till his teens somewhere, and then by 17 it all fell apart. So then at 17, he faced hardship. Hardship. He was sold as a slave. Here he is, this privileged kid. Now he's a slave. Someone owns him. He doesn't even own his own life. Someone else literally like has a title to him, can sell him at market, which they did. And so here he is, favored, now hardship. He's a slave. Then all of a sudden he comes into another season of favor. He's put in charge of Potiphar, the slave owner, his owner's household. He gained so much favor that Potiphar, it literally says this, and we're going to talk about this verse again further. It literally says the only thing Potiphar had to do was this: worry about what he was going to eat. Now, how would you like that? You had somebody who could run your empire, your world so well that all you had to do is get up in the morning and go, will it be Cheerios or Wheaties? I think I'll go to Waffle House, you know? But and then when you're done at Waffle House, you go, see, I need to go ahead and schedule lunch. Let's see, what am I going to do here? And so, I mean, it literally says that's all Potiphar had to do, was figure out what he had to eat. Joseph literally took care of everything else. So he's in favor. He's in favor of his owner. He's in favor of as a slave. He's a slave, but boy, he has it going on. And then hardship strikes again. He's falsely accused and in prison. So here he is in a period of hardship. And if you don't believe that he felt like it was a hardship, listen to these words. It says, this is the guy that he interpreted the dream for that was going to be restored, the cupbearer. It says this: when all goes well with you, Joseph's telling this guy, remember me and show me kindness. Mention me to Pharaoh and get me out of this prison. Sounds like he felt like he was having a hard day. Felt like he thought his life was a little tough then. He says, I was forcibly carried off from the land of the Hebrews, and even here I have done nothing to deserve being put in a dungeon. I mean, you know, he's having to play his own lawyer here. You know, he's saying, look, I am innocent. I've not done anything wrong. Get me out of here. Tell Pharaoh and get me out of here. That doesn't sound like that he's really enjoying being in the dungeon. It sounds like he wants out. So hardship again. And then favor. And this is where we kind of come into a story today. He becomes second in command of probably the greatest nation at that time on the face of the earth. Second in command. And again, in this, and we'll look at a couple verses later, where the king, Pharaoh, says, basically, other than the fact that I'm Pharaoh, you're in charge, bud. You got it. What do you do with that kind of a journey? I'm going to tell you what most of us do. Most of us get stuck somewhere in the hardship, and we're just going, I can't do this. This is too tough. And if you've never felt that way before, you probably are skating around all the tough stuff in life. You're trying to just get by. Because anybody who's lived much of life has come to a point where you're going, man, this feels too tough. I bet even every person who was up here this morning graduated, even high school as well as college, saying there were times along the way where I was going, man, I can't get this done. I can't make it. I'm not going to make it. We've all felt that in some way. But if we stop in the point of hardship, it's very hard to be prepared for the favor that comes along the path as well. And so let's look then to the reasons for his success. And I'm not going to say this is absolutely conclusive, but there are definitely indications of this right here in the scripture for us. The first is his personal confidence. He had confidence. I mean, and you say, well, what do you base that on? Well, he had these dreams. He either was really dumb, in which I don't think he was, or he had a lot of self-confidence to go tell his brothers who didn't care for him all that much and weren't receiving his word of dreams to them very well. So he had a certain level of confidence to go, you know, I mean, how often do you walk up to your siblings when your siblings are all in a group and go, you know, basically say, you know, I had this dream and you guys all bowed down to me. Look, I'm close to my brothers. I'd be run out on a rail and like, you know, man, what are you talking about? You know, I mean, this is not stuff that goes over. So you got to either be stupid or really confident to say something like that, or kind of innocent, which he might have been at that point too. But I think it indicates some level of confidence that he had in himself to be able to do that. And I think we keep seeing that confidence surface throughout his things. He told on his brothers. You know, he was confident of himself. He didn't care if they called him a tattletale. And I'm not talking about someone took his toy away. These were big boys. These were adults, and they were doing some bad sinning, and I'm pretty sure in some other parts of the country or the area they lived in. They were doing some pretty negative things. And he's coming home and going, hey, Dad, just thought you might want to know that the brothers were, whatever, and I can make stuff up, but it's what I would be doing, so just know that it wasn't all that good. He told on them. It didn't go too well. They didn't like him. And he even stood up to his brothers, and he said, you shouldn't do this. So it takes a confidence to do that. He seemed to indicate throughout his life that he had a certain level of personal confidence. And I'm just going to tell you, it doesn't hurt to have a little bit of personal confidence. It can get you in trouble if you're arrogant. I'm not talking about arrogance, but I am talking about being confident in who God has made you to be, being secure in that, having some security in that. Number 2, he put God first in his life. In chapter 39, verse 9, this is where Potiphar's wife was trying to seduce him. He said this, how could I do this wicked thing and sin against God? How could I do this and sin against God? In other words, I can't violate my relationship with God. I can't do something that's going to put that relationship in jeopardy. That would be against God. I can't do that. And it's critical for us to come to a place where we're really not willing to allow something to come between us and God. He put God first before his own sexual desires, before his own power drive to kind of feel like not only am I in charge, but I got the boss's wife too, and many other factors that kind of go along with that. He put God first in his life. Number 3, he gave God credit. Now, I'm going to read these verses to you just because there's so many times it's mentioned in here, I have to point it out to you. And if you don't believe he gave God credit, just listen to how this unwraps here. The Lord was with Joseph, and he prospered, and he lived in the house of his Egyptian master. When his master saw that the Lord was with him, his master didn't go, this is a bright guy. This guy's really sharp. I'm sure he thought that. But the superseding thought that he had was, he said, man, God seems to be with this guy. And also, the master saw this, that the Lord gave him success in everything he did. Joseph had to be given God a lot of credit along the way. Every time that he was complimented, he must have said, it's only by the goodness of the hand of God that this is possible. And whatever it was he said, it made it really clear to his boss that Joseph was totally dependent upon God and believed that everything that good that happened through him was by the graciousness of God's hand. Joseph found favor in his boss's eyes, his owner's eyes, and became his attendant. Potiphar put him in charge of his household, and he entrusted to his care everything he owned. From the time he put him in charge of his household and of all that he owned, listen to this, the Lord blessed the household of the Egyptian because of Joseph. Tom asked you a question this morning. Do you want to put yourself in a place where God can bless you? Hang on to that question and don't forget it over these weeks. He gave God credit where credit was due. He put himself in a place where God could bless him. It says the blessing of the Lord was on everything Potiphar had, both in his fields and his household. Everything that Potiphar owned was blessed, not because Potiphar was such an obedient person, but because Joseph was, and where he was and what he was doing was blessed. He gave God credit. He depended on God. Look at, just listen to me from chapter 40 and verse 8. He asked the guys who had these dreams in prison, he asked them, he goes, don't interpretate. They're telling these dreams, they're upset, they don't understand it. And he's going, but don't interpretations come from God? Don't they belong to God? And then he said, tell me your dreams. Here's what he was setting up to say, look, God's the only one who can do this, but why don't you go ahead and tell my dreams and see if maybe he would use me as a vessel to tell you that. And he did. And then in chapter 41 in verse 16, whenever Pharaoh said, I understand you can interpret dreams. Here's what happened. He says, I cannot, but God will give Pharaoh the answer he desires. But, and again, I still catch myself, even every time I read it, I'm going, oh, Joseph, you just blew it. I mean, here you are, you got shaved, put some new clothes on, and probably slashed a little cologne on or something else, and walk in here like, hey, you may have a little going for you, coming from prison even. And then you tell Pharaoh you can't do it. But the reason he told him he couldn't do it is because he wanted to make sure that God got the credit when it happened. And I have to be willing for God to get the credit for everything in my life. And if I'm not willing to do that, it limits what God might want to do supernaturally through my life. Number 5, he didn't have long pity parties. You say, well, where did you read that? Well, I didn't read that specifically in the Bible, in the narrative, but what I did notice was this: wherever he went as a slave, as a prisoner, as Pharaoh's king, as the assistant to Pharaoh, wherever he went, he rose to the top. Even if it was at the bottom, we mentioned last Sunday, even if he was in prison, he rose to the top of the bottom. He still, you don't get asked to lead things if you're sitting over in a corner and sucking your thumb. I mean, most people say, well, take them to the nursery. Don't ask them, don't put them in charge here, take them to the nursery. So I'm not saying he didn't have any pity party, because I can't imagine that he didn't to some degree. I can't imagine he didn't have some long arguments with God during the nights, or maybe in some afternoon whenever he'd caught up with everything, especially in the prison. I can't imagine that he didn't have points where he was just exasperated. But he didn't seem to be the driver in his life. He seemed to be productive wherever he was with whatever he had in front of him. So he may have had pity parties, but they didn't seem to last very long. Number 6, he did his part, and I cannot overemphasize this. Chapter 39, the first part of 6, it says this, that Potiphar, he did such a good job of running Potiphar's house, and we've already mentioned this, I'm going to mention it again here. He did such a good job that Potiphar did not concern himself with anything except what he ate. I'm not going to repeat what I said earlier. Just understand that's pretty powerful. That means he shoveled up to the table, he did his work, and he did it so well that his boss had no concerns. His boss could go to the beach every week. Everything was okay. It was taken care of. He could just meet his buddies for lunch, because Joseph did his job so well. Chapter 39, verse 23, I think it is. I've got it marked over here, so I can't tell for sure. 23 or 25, I think it's 23. It says the warden paid no attention to anything that was under Joseph's care. Whatever he put him in charge of, the warden was just like walking around whistling Dixie or going, man, that is the laziest warden I've ever seen in my life. Why? He didn't have to worry about it. He came in his desk, he came in his office in the morning, propped his feet up. It sounds like there came a point where he didn't even go bother checking up on him, because Joseph probably sounds like was doing a better job than he was doing when he did it. He just propped his feet up in the desk, and every once in a while ring the bell. Hey, Joseph, what's on the menu for lunch in the kitchen, or whatever it was. He didn't have to worry himself with anything. Anything that was on Joseph's care, he had no concern for, he paid no attention to, anything. Pretty amazing. Then 41:41, here's what Pharaoh said to Joseph. He said, I put you in charge of the whole land of Egypt. And he goes on to say, other than the fact that I'm the king, I'm Pharaoh, you got it, man. I'm going on vacation. The 7 years of prosperity, I'm going to have a good time. I'll come back and eat some lunch with you, when you got, But he's saying is, this guy was so diligent at what he did that he could be trusted to take care of other people's things so well, they didn't have to worry about it. He was a hard worker. He was dependable, and he had integrity. And I'm going to tell you, I run into employers, talk to employers frequently in this time period right now. And you know what their number one headache is? in their company or in their place of employment where they're supervising other people or hiring other people. It's people who really even want to work. People that they can count on to show up. People that will stick with it, stay with them, let alone be trusted enough to turn your back on them. And I don't mean that's not true of everybody, but there's too much of that in our culture. You know, and I think I'm certainly preaching to the choir here. I don't think that's a common thing here by any stretch of imagination in our setting. But at the same time, we can learn something from this, and that is that God rewards faithfulness. He rewards integrity. He rewards hard work. He rewards dependability. He rewards that. And certainly, it seemed like sometimes it didn't seem to work so much for Joseph. He had the hardships in between. But he even named one of his sons in such a way that God had made him fruitful in the land of his suffering. One of his sons, his name represents that idea. And so it's very critical for us to understand and know that there are, is this everything? Are there probably other factors? Certainly other factors, but these are some of the critical factors to his success, reasons why he succeeded. Let's look at the next one, the responsibilities of success. You know, we all want to succeed, but sometimes when we get there, we're like, oh, now what? You know, have you ever gotten what you wanted and then kind of like, what am I going to do with it? You know, it's like almost like, wow, I got here and now what? I think in particular sometimes when people have lived for something that was maybe an achievement that didn't have to do with life, it had to do with only one area of life development or something. Let's say a great athlete and they finally hit the prize, they become the world champion or they become this and they get that, you know, that football or whatever it is, a golden or silver football or something, you know, and they go home with a prize and they look at it and go, I achieved that. I mean, if you only live for that trophy, you better really like metal a lot, you know, sleep with it, you know, carry it with you around, you know, if that's what your life is. What we know is we know that success is a lot more than a pivotal, reach a pinnacle moment. It's got to be more than that because we'll only be there for a short time. So the responsibilities of success. Number one, he was available for opportunity. Do you know some people always want an opportunity but do nothing to be prepared for it? Nothing to be prepared for it. They just waste time, they're waiting for the ship to come in. They're waiting for someone to, come and ask them to marry them. We're waiting. They're doing nothing in preparation. If you waste your downtime, and by that, I don't mean proper Sabbath and a proper rest period. I'm not talking about that. But I'm just saying week after week goes by, month after month goes by, year after year goes by, and you are wasting you're not really achieving anything with your life whatsoever. Then don't go stand on the dock and wait for your ship to come in. Not unless you really like being by the water, because you'll be by the water several years from now too. You've got to prepare for opportunity. Joseph made the best of his situations. Yeah, he was in prison. Well, he became chief. He became right under the warden. He became the assistant warden in the prison. He could have taken this idea. Well, they stuck me in here, and you know what I'm going to do? I'm not going to do anything. They can get me food, and I've got a little cot over here in the corner, and whatever. I didn't bring this on. I didn't ask for it. I'm not going to work for them. Why would I work for them? He could have taken all kinds of attitudes. He could have had all kinds of scenarios where he could have responded differently, reacted negatively. He said, I think what he said was like, I'm here. I might as well do something productive with my life. I might as well make something happen. And so he puts together a system where the warden's watching him. Now the warden's bored because he has something productive to do. Joseph made the best of a situation. Sometimes when we're in hardship, all we can do is gripe and complain and fuss and whine and on and on and on about how, just eat worms and die kind of stuff, It appears as though Joseph, again, he probably swallowed hard, I'm sure, several times, but he made the best of a bad situation. And I'm afraid if we don't make the best of a bad situation, we won't get very much of a good situation come along. You might end up determining your destiny by your attitude in the hardship. Number two, he had a plan. I just have to read these verses to you because it's kind of mind-boggling that he could come out of this prison situation, interpret this dream for the king, Pharaoh, and then come up with something like this. And what we know is, all along the way, he kept going, give God the credit, give God the credit. So, he and God, we're on this page. And so my feeling is that he was hearing from God about what to do. Not only did God give him the interpretation of the dream, but God also gave him the plan of action. And when we get a plan of action from God, it's a very different thing than just sitting around and drumming up one on our own. And so, verse 33 says this of chapter 41. And now let Pharaoh, this is Joseph speaking, let Pharaoh look for a discerning and wise man and put him in charge of the land of Egypt. I don't know if he cleared his throat there or not, but anyway, he said this. Let Pharaoh appoint commissioners over the land to take a fifth of the harvest of Egypt during the 7 years of abundance. They should collect all the food of those good years, these good years that are coming, and store up the grain under the authority of Pharaoh to be kept in the cities for food. This food should be held in reserve for the country to be used during the 7 years of famine that will come upon Egypt, so that the country may not be ruined by the famine. The plan seemed good to Pharaoh and to all his officials. They're just sort of standing around, with their hands in their pockets or their robes or whatever they had, well, that's a tough dream, Pharaoh. I don't know what to do with that. Sounds like kind of a weird dream too, What did you drink the night before? I mean, just, I don't know what their discussions were, but they were like, man, we don't know what to do with this. Joseph comes in, gives them the interpretation, gives God the credit, and he says, well, this is probably how you ought to handle this. And the king liked it. The plan seemed good. He didn't have a plan. His wise men around him didn't have a plan. He's going, that sounds like a good plan. And if he'd have said to Joseph, head on back to prison, it would still been a good plan. But that's not what happened. Number three, he listened to God's voice. Look with me, if you would, up at the memory verse. So Pharaoh asked them, can we find anyone like this man? Well, what's so different about, okay, interpret a dream, but let's see what he said. What was a distinctive factor about this man? One in whom is the Spirit of God. There has to be something supernatural going on in our lives for us to have extraordinary impact. Joseph had the Spirit of God living in him, so much so that a king who wasn't on his mind to be honoring the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. He didn't wake up every morning thinking, I really need to honor, this God. He wasn't thinking that way, but he saw the Spirit of God was present in Joseph's life. And I don't know any other way for that to be evidenced than for us to walk very closely with our God and to learn to recognize his voice and to read his word, to be aware of how he works, and to not be shocked when he challenges us beyond what we might think we're capable of. Number 4, Joseph was ready to implement the plan. Look at verses 39 and 40 of chapter 41. It says this. And Pharaoh said to Joseph, since God has made all this known to you, there is no one so discerning and wise as you. You shall be in charge of my palace, and all my people are to submit to your orders. Only with respect to the throne will I be greater than you. In other words, you've got a plan. I'm ready to say, go forward with a plan. And I'm going to give you the authority to do so. Joseph was ready. Number 5, he was humble. And let me just give you a few snippets here. Whenever he was interpreting the dream or hearing the dream from Pharaoh, in verse 25 of chapter 41, he says this, the dreams of Pharaoh are one and the same. God has revealed to Pharaoh what he's about to do. God has revealed. I'm telling you what the dream means, but God is the one who's revealed it. God has revealed it. And then in verse 28, he says this, God has shown Pharaoh what he is about to do. And then in verse 32, he says this, the reason the dream was given to Pharaoh in two forms is that the matter has been firmly decided by God, and God will do it soon. In other words, he's ready to go ahead and take action on this. You're disturbed. You had the dreams. He gave it to you in two different forms. The show's on the road. It's getting started. It's here. It's right in front of you right now. The 7 years of plenty is about to begin. Joseph had no arrogance in that. He had absolute humility. He's saying, Pharaoh, I'm telling you the dream. I'm explaining to you the answer, but God's the one who has revealed it. Number 6, Joseph enlisted the help of everyone. In chapter 41 again, verses 47 to 49, it says, during the 7 years of abundance, the land produced plentifully. Joseph collected all the food produced in those 7 years of abundance in Egypt and stored it in the cities. In each city, he put the food grown in the fields surrounding it. Joseph stored up huge quantities of grain like the sand of the sea. It was so much that he stopped keeping records because it was beyond measure. Just became so massive. It had so much in this time of plenty. They were gathering in, and they were gathering and given locales and all these places. So what he did was he got everybody involved in Egypt. Here's the plan. He traveled throughout the land. He assigned people to be in charge of this area and that area, and he started getting everyone that had crops to bring them in, to store them for the future. And as a result of that, there was plenty during the 7 years, not only for the land of Egypt, but also for all the surrounding areas as well, and governments. And so here's what I want to share with you kind of in closing, and that is this. In our history as a church, we're coming up on 18 years, and just our very first service was the last Sunday of June in 1996. And so we'll have 18 years at that point as far as officially being organized, having a church. We count our actual birthday the second Sunday of September, and so we really won't consider ourselves to be 18 years old until then. But during those 18 years, outside of the fact, and this, I'm not going to get into great details of this journey with you today, but I want to summarize it briefly. And when the church was started, Pastor Greg and I spent a lot of time together. We beforehand and then during and certainly after the beginning as well, just working through all kinds of refining the call to the best that we could, trying to understand everything that God was saying to us. And so I'm not gonna put that into what I'm calling the presses of God over these 18 years, because that was really kind of the determining factor whether the church would exist or not. And we felt God's leadership over and over and over again in those weeks before we started the church, and certainly in the months in the first few years, particularly after the church was started. But there were 3 times over this season of 18 years where God has put a press on me. And by that may not make any sense to you, but put something on my heart and my mind that was bigger than I knew what to do with. In other words, I didn't have an idea or solution exactly myself. And then whenever the idea or solution came along, it really kind of looked like, well, how are we going to do that? And so the first one of those was when we moved from what we've loved to call our little blue building off of Hightower Drive over in Martinez, when we moved our Sunday morning service over to Augusta Prep. At that time, I don't know, we were probably averaging maybe 80 people, somewhere in there, maybe bumping up over 100 occasionally. But we had kind of used up the good graces of the community for a building. Now, if you drive by that building today, it looks a whole lot better than it did then. Anybody that can remember back then, you know. I mean, today it actually kind of looks like the Taj Mahal in comparison, you know. I mean, it's like, and so, but it was just 2 clapboard buildings stuck together with more space than you might imagine. And so we were able to get a great start there. But we needed a new place for Sunday morning. So we worked out a situation for Augusta Prep and to meet there. The problem was, it was, and you have to understand at that point, what our budget was at that point, and it was like $1,300 more per month. And, we had weeks we were praying in the money. We were, we were just like, this kind of like getting by. I mean, we were that, week to week kind of thing. And so really honestly, that looked like a huge, huge amount of money. And I'll never forget, I made a special appointment to go see Pastor Kevin, my mentor in Atlanta. And we sat down and I started talking to him and I said, Kevin, I'm here specifically to talk about a move that I think we need to make, but I don't know how we'd make it. And so I don't know if you can just help me process this. And Kevin, in his typical fashion, isn't an answer giver. He's a question asker. And so rather than to give you answers, he asks you questions. So he said to me, so Rod, what do you, I'm telling him this story and tell him what we found out. And he says, well, so why are you thinking about going to Augusta Prep? And I said, well, because, and I gave him all the reasons. And he said, do you feel like that's what you should do? And I said, yeah, I do. And he says, then why aren't you doing it? I said, well, like I explained with our budget, and I can show you right here, and I'm like explaining the budget. And he said, so, okay, I said all that. So why aren't you doing it? And I said, well, I thought I just answered that question, but did I miss something? Did I need to explain? He goes, no. He said, I'm just asking. He said, let me ask you another question. Do you believe that's the right thing for the church at this time? I said, oh, yeah. I mean, that's why we went and checked it out, why we have, there's a contract ready if we could sign it and everything. That's why, yeah, I do feel like it's the right thing. He said, well, then tell me again, why aren't you doing it? And then, we went down this road, like to where I was like getting to almost like distraction, like, okay, Kevin, I understand, but I'm trying to explain to you. And so he said, let me just tell you a little formula that God gave me a few years ago. That is, if you know in your heart that you've heard from God, and this is the right thing to do, this fits the mission of what God's called you to do, whether it's for you individually, whether it's for the church, then what you have to choose is whether you're going to obey God or not. That's the first choice you have to make. You have to make a decision. So you know what the vision is, you have to make a decision. And what I've found is over the years, Rod, that whenever God was truly leading me, and I made a decision to do what he was calling me to do, that third component of financing it was something God would help out with, and he would take care. And so I got in my car, and I'm headed home. I was mad. I was, frustrated. I mean, because I already knew the answer. But it meant I had to have enough faith to pull the trigger, And so anyway, whatever, over the course, here, let me just tell you this. When we moved into that, we went ahead and did it. And when we moved into that facility, there was not a significant change in the makeup of the congregation for the next 6 months or so. But we went into a surplus. I promise you, we'd never had a surplus. Greg can vouch to that. Never had a surplus whatsoever. And we ended up with kind of like some extra funds in the account for the next few years. And where we weren't really going from week to week. We had a little bit of cushion there. And our expenses were up. So that really was a confirming thing in my own heart. But I'm not the kind of person who, I don't go around always looking for ways to test God or for him to test me. And so, okay, that was great. We went through that. The second thing was this. We knew we had to purchase property. So we did a fundraiser. We did do a fundraiser. And in that fundraiser, we raised enough money to get some matching funds from the Wesleyan Church. And then from that, ended up with a little over $200,000, which was probably more than our budget was at that time, our annual budget at that time. And so then through God's miraculous hand, we were able to get this piece of property. And we didn't get we weren't the top bidder. We had to do it on a closed bid. And we weren't the top bidder, but God saw to it to allow us to have this property and to lead us here. And then we met in the little buildings over here. I mean, that's That was all the buildings that was on the property. So we're over there in those buildings, and we did 2 services, and we set the building up, the auditorium, like an airplane. That meant we had one aisle down the middle, and you had to go to the window. You know, you could get a window seat or an aisle seat, and then some in between. But that's how we could fit everybody in. Like one of the services particularly was fuller than the other, and so that's how we fit everybody in. And so we, you know, what we knew was we would have graciousness for a while with people, but there would come a point where we were already kind of maxing out the facility, had the children's ministry over here doing this. I mean, but we were happy because we weren't paying rent anymore, and we were on the property God had really, it was clear, had given to us. And you know, we had to do some refurbishing of the building over there, but we got out of all of rental. We've never rented anything since then, thank God. And then we knew we needed to build a building. At the time of needing to build a building, we, you know, certainly owed money on the property here as well. And so it seemed kind of insurmountable. We did some research, talked to other pastors, got some help from some churches that were ahead of us, and in the process did our own campaign and raised in the area of $650,000 to get this building up and going. And in the course of that, I would say that was almost triple what our annual budget was at that time, what we raised. So we were maybe having about $250,000 on an annual budget, and we raised $650,000 to build this building. Now, it didn't. You can look in the back of bulletin and see it isn't totally paid for, the property in this. But I will tell you this: that we have about 1.7, and I don't have hard numbers here, but $1.7 million invested in this piece of property that's worth more than that today, even from what we have invested in it. And right now, if you'll minus out what's on the list, if you'll notice in the back of your bulletin, there's over $50,000 come in through the month of May for put down on the debt, on the principal. And so by the next week or two, that number, total number owed, will be about $60,000 on the total thing, kind of back to where we started whenever we first bought the property, and we have this facility. And so we've paid down. Within the next couple of weeks, we'll have paid down over about $1.3 million already as a church. Now, you look around and you go, well, how did we do that? You know, how did we do that? Well, it's only God's faithfulness through our obedience. And I'm saying that to lead up to this, and that is about 6 months ago, there came a kind of a press that God began to put onto my heart for some next steps for us as a church. And over these next few weeks, we're going to lay that out for you, what that looks like and what that's about. And I really want you to be here. If you can't be here, make sure you get a DVD or you watch it on YouTube, or just from the website. And because we really want this to be an effort that we all get on board with and we work together toward.